Today on History's Tech, we are continuing our look at different classifications of ships, and we are looking at the cruiser. In modern day terms, these are one of the largest ships in modern navies, typically performing multiple roles, including search and destroy, ocean escorts, or even sea denial. However, from the age of sail, they had a slightly different role, and they evolved through the centuries to become what they are today. So let's go ahead and get started at looking at the cruiser. Now, the origins of the cruiser come from this ship right here, the Ship of the Line, which was a very powerful ship, especially during the 17th century. However, they were really too large, inflexible, and expensive to be dispatched on long range missions that were becoming popular as global trade began to expand during the 17th century. Now, the first Navy to deploy a more cost effective replacement for the Ship of the Line was actually the Dutch Navy. And these were the earliest cruisers we can really come into terms. However, they really weren't developed or deployed in large numbers to make any sort of significant difference. However, the idea was planted for a ship that could operate independently at long range. And like with so many pieces of naval technology, it all started to change during the age of steamships. And as the development progressed into the iron frigates and then the ironclad warships, we're going to see that eventual continuous rise of these heavier, larger, more powerful naval warships that are going to eventually give birth to the cruiser. Now, the French will actually be one of the earlier pioneers of this. They will construct a type of smaller ironclad specifically designed for overseas cruising duties. And the first of these will be the Bellicoseuse, which was commissioned in 1865. And these were considered to be called station ironclads. They were purposely to be used as what we will eventually consider to be armored cruisers, a type of ironclad that's going to do the role of what we would consider more of a traditional cruiser. And this is going to lead into that continuous development. And following this, we'll see the first true armored cruisers be developed. The Russian General Admiral, probably one of the worst names I've ever thought of for a warship. And then this is going to be followed by the HMS Shannon. And these are these heavy ironclad steamships. They carry large guns. They're designed to be sent off long distance to be independent. And as part of their required them to actually be equipped with masts for full sailing. And the idea was that they wouldn't have to refuel the ships as frequently because they could still sail. But the problems with the cruiser would actually come to light pretty quickly during a conflict between the British and the Peruvian navies. The British HMS Shaw took on the Peruvian Monitor Huascar. And while the Monitor is an older design than that of the cruiser Shaw, it managed to hold up against the cruiser, showing that there were some limitations to the cruisers and they would need to improve them. And that's what we get to when we get to the end of the 19th century. By the late 1800s, we're seeing a need to evolve the cruiser. And the cruiser evolution goes three directions, really: the protected cruiser, the torpedo cruiser, and the armored cruiser. Now, the first of these design changes was the protected cruiser. And basically what they did is they took the design of the cruiser and went with lighter steel. And steel was much lighter than iron, stronger than wood, so it meant that they could have a stronger, faster ship. And the idea was because these could be stronger and faster than the ironclad, they could be utilized for commerce raiding. Maybe not able to take on the emerging battleship, but better for knocking out enemy supply lines or even invading an enemy harbor and taking out shipping. And many of these ships started to get rid of the rigging as it was no longer seen as a necessary need for the ships, as they could actually have longer range due to larger coal bunkers. Another variant on the earlier ironclad cruisers came in the form of the torpedo cruiser. And this was essentially a larger, heavier version of a gunboat, but these were smaller, unarmored cruisers. They were designed to reach speeds of over 20 knots. They were armed with medium to small caliber guns, as well as a large complement of torpedoes. And they were essentially designed to take on heavier ships such as battleships due to their speed and their ability to carry torpedoes. And the final major design variation of the cruiser is the upgraded version of the armored cruiser. So the armored cruiser actually came about during the mid-19th century. However, by adding steel to it, heavier guns, they made larger and larger cruisers to the point that they would evolve into what we call pre-dreadnought battleships. To the point by the turn of the 20th century, we're going to see them basically evolve into the early battleships until the dreadnought comes along and reclassifies what a battleship is. Now, as the world entered into the 1900s, there was a need for newer and faster ships. As ships kept getting heavier and heavier, there was a need for a faster and faster vessel. Modern cruisers were now almost as powerful as the battleships that were emerging in the early 1900s. So you needed to be able to not necessarily outgun these battleships, but at least outrun them and outmaneuver them. So the development of the scout cruiser was this move. The idea to create these fast, small, lightly armed and armored type reconnaissance cruisers. Next cruiser development came in the form of the battle cruiser, which was specifically designed to rival the new dreadnought. In order to prevent navies from having to replace their cruisers, the idea was to create a battle cruiser, a mixed ship between that of a battleship and a cruiser, providing even heavier firepower on that of a cruiser platform. However, they were typically slightly faster than battleships, sacrificing armor for speed. And one of the last major cruiser developments before the start of World War I was that of the light cruiser. And the idea behind this was that these were essentially the modernized version of the protected cruiser. They had all around armor plating, including on the deck, and they could support multiple roles in military conflicts: scouts, fleet support vessels, destroyers, command ships, fire support vessels, even convoy escorts, providing an all around multi purpose role similar to that of a destroyer. Now, because of all the different variations of cruisers at the start of World War I, the cruiser became the workhorse of the World War I navies of the world, being utilized by every major navy and every major campaign naval wise of World War I. After World War I, the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 put severe limits on the construction of the cruisers, but it also put a very distinct name and classification on what is a cruiser, what is a light cruiser, what is a heavy cruiser. And because of this, a lot of navies are going to start developing what's known as a treaty cruiser, cruisers that meet the limit of the Washington Naval Treaty, but at the highest end of it, to prevent their navies from falling behind. Now, construction of heavy cruisers actually began during World War I, but they didn't get classified as a heavy cruiser until the London Naval Treaty of 1930, when, due to the weight and caliber of its guns, it was on that higher end of the treaty cruisers and it was classified as a heavy cruiser. One interesting variant of the large cruiser or treaty cruiser is that of the pocket battleship. And this was basically a cruiser that could pack battleship level firepower. These were specifically used by the Germans with their Deutschland class battleships during World War II. It was kind of a niche idea, mainly to try to get around some of the treaty regulations. Now, due to the development of the pocket battleships and other large cruisers, we see the development of what's known as the large cruiser or super cruiser. And these were all cruisers that carried larger than 8-inch guns. The Alaska class, for instance, carried 12-inch guns. However, they were still just basically scaled up cruisers. They carried double or triple turret setups, heavy guns, and still had the speed that was common with a cruiser. During the Second World War, it continued its duty as basically the workhorse for many navies, basically filling in the role of a heavy ship, an assault ship, a battleship, until battleship production could be really ramped up for many nations. And it played a crucial role, even developing its own variant during this time period as an anti-aircraft ship. Now, after the war, we're going to see a big quantum leap in development and change in the cruiser by going to the guided missile cruiser. By the end of World War II, many navies saw the vulnerability that large caliber ships had against aircraft, and so many of them began to get rid of their battleships and larger cruisers. So a leap forward in technology was necessary to keep cruisers around, and that's where the guided missile cruiser comes in. The development of both surface-to-air missiles and surface-to-surface missiles that could be deployed from cruisers allowed them to be continuously used and upgraded, and further the development of the cruiser when a lot of ships started to be basically put out as obsolete. And this is eventually going to lead to the development of the nuclear-powered cruiser. And the nuclear-powered cruiser kind of filled the role of the original idea of the cruiser. You now had a ship that did not require to be refueled for years. It could be independently deployed as a patrol vessel, a search and rescue vessel, a deterrent vessel, because of its longevity and its ability to deploy a wide variety of weapon systems inside of an area. You now had this incredibly powerful ship that could be utilized in all types of roles. Sadly, for the United States, the nuclear powered aircraft carriers didn't last as long as other countries like the Soviet Union, with the current Russian Kirov class being the only deployable nuclear powered cruisers in existence right now. Now, one lesser used class of cruiser that doesn't get talked about a lot, mainly because it's a rather unique version of a cruiser, is known as the aircraft cruiser. And this essentially combined the firepower of a cruiser with that of a light aircraft carrier. And this is going to be deployed by countries like the Japanese and the Swedish before World War II. But after World War II, it's going to be especially popular with countries like India and Russia that will really like this idea of having this multi-purpose vessel. Today, only two countries still deploy cruisers. Both Russia and the United States have the last remaining cruiser fleets in the world, with the United States actually sadly in the process of getting rid of their Ticonderoga class cruisers, mainly due to the fact that the current Arleigh Burke class and future DDX class destroyers fill in the exact same role of a Ticonderoga class cruiser, but for less money and lower maintenance costs. Very likely here in the next 30 to 40 years, we will probably no longer see any Navy deploy a cruiser. It will go the way of the battleship as an obsolete piece of technology. And while it had its heyday and its value in modern navies due to the equalizers developed by newer weapons platforms, there's just no longer a need for the cruiser, sadly. But that's it for today. I thank you for joining me. I look forward to talking to you on the next time.